we're doing this on StreamYard, so we're in different rooms, which means that, it's a little less personal for us, but hopefully you guys don't even notice until I said something.
More engaging for the audience, less personal for us.
Yeah. So excited about being here. We're going to start our next series today. We're going to do a series on the temple. We're going to talk about things like, today we're going to talk about Masonry and some of the symbolism and things like that in the temple. We're going to spend some time talking about worthiness interviews. We're going to spend some time talking about the ceremony itself.
Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma is meant for educational purposes only.
By now, we're kind of delving into just the history and the similarities between Masonry and the temple. As with a lot of the things that we do, if you're looking for a lot of specifics, we'll refer you to other places. They'll be in the show notes. There's a Mormonism Live that is done by RFM and Bill Reel that is terrific, where they're talking to the author of one of the books about Masonry and Mormonism. That's super helpful and just really detailed as they do. I know that Mormon Stories has done a few talking about Masonry and temples, so we're going to try and focus on some of the mental health aspects of what we're talking about. And let's drive on from there. What do you say, Sarah?
I think that sounds great. You read it.
Picture of the book, you mean? So it's Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration by Cheryl L. Bruno, Joe Steve Schwick III, and Nicholas S. Litursky.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I would definitely recommend to our readers is we're going to reference a couple of things that Cheryl, who guested on Mormonism Live, episode 96, some of the stories or some of the analogies that she referenced are, I think, really vital to our conversation today. But I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. But also, as we listened to this episode, I was like, wow, there's a lot here that I had no idea about. And there's just no way to encapsulate that. Nor am I a history buff. And Mason, while you love history, I don't think you would identify yourself as a history buff. And so I would I would like for our readers to be able to, if you're interested, to go into this, because I think the insights that Cheryl was discussing are going to be gone into a lot more depth in the book that she co-authored in order to really grasp just how interesting and in a lot of cases problematic the appearance of Masonry in the Mormon temple is. So, all right, Mason, did you want to go ahead and get us started with your thoughts?
I can. What did you have in mind?
I thought you were leading today. Okay, this is called miscommunication in a marriage right here. So
is that what that is?
Yeah. All right. So one of the things that we were going to talk about today is the history. So Mason, how did Masonry end up being so connected to Mormonism?
Well, so if you go back to just the beginnings of Masonry, and you're going to, again, if you want all that kind of detail, it's in that podcast there or in that book, if that's what you prefer. But you go back to a long time ago, the first writings of Masonry are like in the 1400s and really have to do with just a group of masons, like stone cutters, stone builders. And they were this group of people that were building cathedrals, were building lots of stuff, lots of these big buildings. And so they kind of formed their own group. And then as the building of cathedrals kind of decreased, then they let other people in, which is where it kind of became more of Freemasonry. I went to lots of different, Wikipedia and just things like that to have an idea of where it came from. So this is from actually the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I'll read to you. Freemasonry is not a Christian institution, though it has often been mistaken for such. Freemasonry contains many of the elements of a religion. Its teachings enjoin morality, charity, and obedience to the law of the land. In most traditions, the applicant for admission is required to be an adult male, and all applicants must also believe in the existence of a supreme being and in the immortality of the soul. In practice, some lodges have been charged with prejudice against Jews, Catholics, and non-whites. Generally, Freemasonry in Latin countries has attracted those who question religious dogma or who oppose the clergy, whereas in the Anglo-Saxon countries, the membership is drawn largely from among white Protestants, and so on. English Masons are actually forbidden to affiliate with any of the recreational organizations or quasi-Masonic societies on pain of suspension. That doesn't sound Mormon-like at all.
No, you don't think there's like some excommunication vibes going on?
Right. Nothing
there,
like that.
if you associate with somebody other than us, you're going to be in trouble.
Mostly it's not necessarily associating with anybody but us, but associating with other organizations that are kind of sort of trying to be like us. That kind of harkens back to even when, the only Christian religion was Catholicism. And then you started having this Protestant Reformation, and Catholics started excommunicating people. They excommunicated Martin Luther. The history of the Protestant Revolution is not that dissimilar to the history of Mormonism, where you get dissenters and you axe them, you get rid of them. I think that there's a lot, just from that explanation, there's a lot about Freemasonry that would appeal to Christianity in general, trying to be moral, trying to be good people. I don't know exactly what led to this kind of a big influx, it seems like, in New England, but whatever it was, it seems like the family of Joseph Smith got swept up in it, and that persisted and continued. I think it was on Wikipedia, but I'm not quite sure. Somebody had said that there was more Masons in Nauvoo than there were in the whole state of Illinois, but they were using numbers like 260 versus 230. One of the things I heard on the Mormonism live episode is that they estimate there are about 1,500 Freemasons in Nauvoo and the surrounding areas. So a big deal. I think it kind of plays to this idea of secret, having something that other people don't have. You certainly see that in the temple. I think that's a pretty decent kind of just smack in your face history of Freemasonry. Is there something else that you wanted from that?
Yeah, I think that, so you're referring what Cheryl from the Mormonism Live episode 96 was saying, that most of the Masonic lodges had, numbers between like 30 and 60, I think is what she said. Please don't quote me on those numbers. Whereas the Masonic Lodge in Nauvoo, or was it Ohio? I don't remember which location, but they had
Nauvoo.
Okay,
it wasn't
so Nauvoo.
A big deal in Ohio, from what we understand.
Okay, but that the Nauvoo one had 1,500 compared to 15 to 30 or 30 to 60 or something like that. So a huge impact. I think the thing that really stuck out to me from what Cheryl was saying in that episode was that Joseph Smith's father was very much into Masonry, that we had that story where, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, Mason, maybe you remember the name, I'm terrible with names, was that he had revealed some of the secrets of Masonry. And so members of the Masonic Lodge took him out to punish him, and then he disappeared. And so the assumption is that he was killed for revealing secrets of Masonry, and that after that, it was very appalling to the, local people. And so a lot more people got involved in Masonry so that they could be more moral and sharing those secrets and whatnot. And so basically that during the religious Reformation, there was also a saturation of Freemason involvement. That the idea
there's a hearkening to American history there too. George Washington, Ben Franklin were all considered Masons. If you watch National Treasure, of course, that whole thing is built on Masonic symbolism and secrecy and things like that. So certainly a precedent, and just it almost feels a little bit like a good old boys club, where you can be involved, you get all this special information, and good on you kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, another thing that really stood out was Cheryl's analogy of kryptonite, basically saying, hey, Mason, do you know what kryptonite is? And when she had asked that question in the podcast, as I was listening to it, I was like, that's Superman's vice, right? That's
Right.
the Superman's going down with the kryptonite, but
Right,
that
his
kryptonite,
weakness.
right, that's his weakness, but that kryptonite actually historically has a very different meaning. But because of culture, and the popularity of the Superman story, most people today would not be able to tell you what kryptonite actually is. But even if you have not seen the Superman movies, you're still going to make that association of kryptonite to Superman. And so
Right.
the reason that I'm sharing Cheryl's analogy here, and the analogy that I believe is written in the book Method Infinite, is that that's the same phenomenon that we have today. And that as we ignore the historical foundations of Freemasonry, we lose the meaning of it and how we're still utilizing it, or how Mormons are still utilizing it today. Is it Mormons, or is it the idea of Freemasons in general, that they were like the bricklayers of the Solomon Temple? I don't know if that's a
that is
Masonry belief.
according to Cheryl Bruno. She's talking about legends in Masonry. So, and she goes into a lot of different symbolism about that. But yeah, that legends of Masonry, as if she tells the story, and I'm going to probably butcher this, so just some little details here. Take
Read
that
the
into
book.
consideration.
You can buy Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD, by me, anywhere books are sold, including Audible.
Did you know a 2018 study showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? I'm Kat, mother of 3 and founder of Ritual. When I was 4 months pregnant, I couldn't find a prenatal I could trust, so I created my own. Ours is made traceable, third-party tested for heavy metals, and recently earned the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. But don't just take my word for it. Get 25% off at ritual.com/prenatal.
Yeah, but she talked about after the Babylonian captivity, when they were allowed to go back to Israel, like 3 people were sent ahead to go to the temple, and they basically dug down into the remains of the temple and found 9 arches that were protecting this vault underneath the ground that had this a gold plate, a triangular gold plate that was supposedly contained the name of God on it. So a lot of symbolism there. And of course, just in that short little retelling, you can see that some of that probably got sucked into Joseph Smith's story. And so that kind of goes back to that, but even to hearkening back apparently to Solomon's temple, and one of the masons of that temple was actually killed because he wouldn't reveal part of, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So the legend is that it goes back to Solomon's temple, and maybe even further. Of course, the writings that we know are masonry writings only go back to about the 1400s.
Well, and I think that, the idea that it's legend is really important, because generally we don't look at legends as being factually accurate. Legends are stories that have been told over time. Pieces of it might be true, pieces of it might not be. Pieces of it have been exaggerated. Some of them have been lost. That's kind of the idea of what a legend actually is. And so I think that that's really important to identify, is that, this is basically the origin story, but it's a story. I would be interested. I think it was Cheryl that also said that in the beginning of Masonry, they they owned this as kind of a story to inspire. And then for a time period during like Joseph Smith's time, they took it as a literal story.
Right.
And
I think
they,
so, because of course Joseph Smith, he incorporates so much of what the Freemason ceremonies were, incorporates so much of that and puts that into the temple as if it is a literal thing that is going on. Whether or not the actual ceremony from Freemasonry was literal, I don't know, but certainly there was more than just symbolism in what he applied into the temple. And if you look at the temple ceremony now, there's more than just symbolism there. This is basically a retelling of an actual story that happened that led to us having all the tokens and signs and covenants and blah, blah, blah to get back to the celestial kingdom, to get back to God.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you because I don't think I understand. Also, listeners, if you can hear that buzzing noise, apparently my upstairs office partner is vacuuming.
Apparently.
I don't know if it's coming through.
I could hear it, but I didn't hear it in the headphones. So hopefully
yeah,
you're not
so if you heard the buzz. Also, our children are in studio today, so we might get interrupted and have a cute little visitor or two or three, or a tantruming visitor or two or three. Well, we'll just see how that goes.
No, never going to happen.
Yeah. They all have their own individual device, which usually means they're not going to fight unless somebody runs out of batteries or gets bored. So Mason, I'm not certain that I understand what you mean by an actual story being told in the temple. Like, can you explain or kind of clarify what you mean by that? Because I'm feeling a little confused by what you meant.
Well, without going into too much of the temple ceremony today, because we're going to cover that at another time, but if you've been through the temple, the story that is told there, the story of the creation, the story of Adam and Eve, and so on, is told as if it is an actual telling of what happened.
So meaning and then like factual events.
Right.
This is how it happened.
Is what happened.
Absolute
right.
truth. Got it.
This is how the creation happened. This is what happened with Adam and Eve in the garden. This is what happened after the garden, and so on. It is told as if it is a factual telling of real events. And then as you move on to the symbolism and the covenants and all that stuff, it is told as if that's what happened to Adam. And then I suppose it's assumed that continued on past Adam, but now it's being told again to us as the elect that are able to be in the temple. These are the things that you need in order to get back to God. So there's certainly symbolism in what's done, but I don't think it was really intended as symbolism. I think it was intended as, this is what's going to happen. Right. We talk about the penalties and stuff. We know that some people probably considered those penalties sort of symbolic, but other people did not. They considered them very much a real thing.
Right.
And
like the Lafferty brothers. The Lafferty brothers took it way serious, which ended in the killing of an infant and a young mother. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, the killing of the mother, that it's gross, but killing an innocent infant that was, I think, 9 months old. I don't remember exactly how old the infant victim was, but it's a little creepy. And you see a lot of these extreme groups. Mason, you and I have been doing a little bit of research on the Visions of Glory book and like the Chad and Lori Daybell stuff and the Tim Ballard stuff. And it gets really gross when people are taking a lot of what is taught so literally. And of course, after the fact, after crime has been committed, people are like, "Ooh, yeah, they took that too far. That's disgusting." But before the crime is committed, look how many followers they have. And that's really where we want to start looking at the characters. So some of the thoughts that have come to my mind as we've been preparing for today's episode is that we write what we know and we create what we know. And so, when we look at Joseph Smith and the Mormon temple ceremonies as they are, or as they were in his day, and then as they are today, what did Joseph Smith do or say or create that he was already familiar with? And how is that showing up? And when we look at the history of Joseph Smith, we look at the Bible. We look at the Book of Mormon. And if you read the original Joseph Smith history by his mother, not the rewrite that Brigham Young did where he took stuff out, but the original printing of the Joseph Smith history by his mother. And I think they've now reprinted that original and taken out the Brigham Young. I'd have to go back and look.
I
but
don't
the
know
Joseph
what the
Smith
church has done. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the church has done, but I think the original's been reprinted. I'm not positive. But when you look at that original, you're going to find stories from Lucy Mack Smith that Joseph Smith had been telling stories about Nephites and Lamanites and Native Americans and hidden treasures for years, that he was very good at telling these stories, and that he kind of did that during family time. And, the vision of the tree of life that Joseph Smith puts in the Book of Mormon was actually a dream that Joseph Smith Sr. had that, Joseph Smith takes from his father, takes credit for, and plops it into the Book of Mormon. We know that as we look at this historically, we can see that, a lot of the industries that Joseph Smith is citing in the Book of Mormon were common industries of his day, and that those are showing up in the Book of Mormon. And I think that as we kind of look at behavioral patterns, you're going to see, hey, Joseph Smith grew up in a community where Freemasonry was very popular. Prominent figures, all the way down to your simple farmers, male counterparts were involved in Masonry. This was not as unfamiliar as a lot of us would think that it may have been. Basically, if you were a man and you were wanting to join a group that encouraged morality and service and whatnot, you could join a Mason lodge and you could go up through the ranks. And the higher up in the ranks you got, the more secretive it got, the more code names it got, those parallels. I don't know if anybody else saw. I think my microphone just went out. I don't know why it does that.
You dropped a little bit, but we still heard you.
Okay,
and
great.
You're back to normal now.
Yay! I didn't touch anything. It just went red all of a sudden. So, anyway, it's interesting to see these parallels. Some of the parallels that Cheryl brought up are, increasing in knowledge and therefore in levels like the sun, moon, and stars, or the beehive is definitely part of Masonry first, and the arches in the Book of Mormon being the keystone of our religion. Mason, that story that you just told about the 9 archways into the catacombs, so on and so forth, all of that, it starts to show up. Other things.
I think that a lot of it could be even considered maybe coincidental. But as you look at so much of it, like a keystone, a keystone is a piece of architecture, right? It could be completely coincidental that Joseph Smith decided to use that word for the Book of Mormon. But as you look at his influence and his involvement with Masonry and all the other things, you can see it quickly becomes far less coincidental and far more likely that it was related to his association with Masonry.
Right. Well, and you would, some of the things. So I know like Mormonism is like, oh, well, this went back to the Solomon Temple in the Bible. And so, of course, there's going to be this symbolism here, except that I remember when I was very young, the Mormon church completely denied any similarity at all with Freemasonry, which is really funny to me because I don't think Freemasonry has ever fallen off the planet. Why would you lie about something that can be easily verified? But it's that's the secretness of it becomes problematic, because if you're a Freemason, you're not supposed to talk about it. If you're Mormon and you've gone to the temple, you're not supposed to talk about it. And so I think there was kind of this, I don't know, almost false trust put into the people that these connections would not ever be made because
Maybe. Yeah. And go ahead. We see the same thing with, I mean, this is a pattern that Mormonism does, right? At first deny, and then and deny vehemently.
Right.
And then once the information comes out that verifies that you can't deny it anymore, then you accept it, but you whitewash it, you color it,
Right.
you make it look like, well, yeah, it's not a big deal. You don't even talk about the fact that 10 years ago you denied it like crazy.
Right.
You don't even talk about it. You just, okay, well, you know what? We're not even going to talk about that. Let's just move on. Okay. Yeah. So you found out. Okay, cool. And it's a pattern with Mormonism that's what they do. They deny first, then they accept it if they have to, and then they explain it as little as possible to essentially to the faithful people, to the people that are already faithful. Well, here's kind of an explanation for you. You just hang on to that. It'll be enough. It'll be okay. And it's just a pattern that they have.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of want to talk about for a second. Oh, whoops, I'm clicking the wrong one. I miss Alex today. I'm clicking it all over the place. All right. Alex does a better job than Sarah. So anyway, one of the things that I really want to talk about right now before we jump a little bit deeper into Masonry is you've got, from a mental health perspective, we really need to be able to look at behavioral patterns. When we talk about who Joseph Smith was, if we're looking at things always as an isolated incident, we're going to miss a lot of red flags because, as Mason was saying, it's really easy to kind of explain away, well, maybe it's just the sun, moon, and stars as the only connection. Well, that can be a coincidence. It's a great analogy. More than one people can come up with, or more than one person can come up with this idea of the sun, moon, and stars and, certain glories in heaven,
Right.
or certain brightness of individuals, right?
Sun, moon, stars have always been worshipped and adored and used and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of religion.
Right. And so really one of the things that stands out to me is that when you start to accumulate who Joseph Smith was. So let's look at who is Joseph Smith. So he's been treasure digging and was convicted of fraud and admitted to it. When we look at, okay, he's basically coercing young girls and other men's wives into plural marriage, in such a way that as you read the stories, the raw data, the original stories, you're like, hey, there's some coercion here. If free agency is the greatest gift of God, why is God basically saying, if you don't do this, we're going to be destroyed, or if you do this, everybody gets heaven? It's very manipulative. It's very coercive. And then you look at the Freemasonry, and we know that Joseph Smith became a master Mason. What, a few weeks, Mason? What do you remember that timeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and read that for us.
This is from the Mormon Stories website. It says on May 4th to 5th, 1842, mere weeks after obtaining the Masonic ritual, Smith introduced the LDS endowment ceremony to close friends, including Masonry's nearly identical token, signs, penalties, prayer circle, new name ritual, apron, etc. Richard Bushman suggests he had a green thumb for growing ideas from tiny seeds.
Can you read that Richard Bushman quote again? Because I think from an active, believing Mormon historian perspective, the fact that he's the one that said this is so, I don't know, insightful, instructive, eye-opening, light bulb moment. Go ahead, Mason. Read that again.
Yeah, let me read that again. And then I'm going to read the next paragraph because I think it's also important here. But Richard Bushman suggests, quote, he had a green thumb for growing ideas from tiny seeds, unquote. The Mormon Stories site goes on. Mormonism's bond with Masonry ebbed and flowed with the political landscape, but by October of 42, Nauvoo's 253 members, this is where I heard this from, Nauvoo's 253-member lodge outnumbered the 227 Masons and all other Illinois lodges combined. Nauvoo Masons held a fundraising play to pay Smith's mounting legal bills. Brigham Young and other LDS church leaders participated in lead roles. Years later, Heber C. Kimball quipped, "We have the true Masonry, they have now and then a thing that is correct, but we have the real thing." So he basically usurps it from Masonry. Right. Smith's last words when he was murdered in Carthage jail came as he attempted to jump out of the window. "Oh Lord my God," were likely the first words of the Masonic cry of distress. "Oh Lord my God, is there no help for a widow's son?" And then they go on with a whole bunch of similarities, which we can get to if we want to.
Yeah. Well, and I love the statement that he grew things out of small seeds, because we see this pattern both in the way that he wrote the Book of Mormon and the way he created the Book of Abraham, and the way that the temple ceremony is. Question. He took information and data from his environment, he grew it into something much bigger, pronounced himself the expert and the mouthpiece of God for that thing, and then purported that ours is better than everybody else's.
And he could change it however he wanted, because he's the revelator, quote unquote. Right. Yeah, he changed it however he wanted.
Right. And what I see in this is that Joseph Smith is demonstrating narcissistic traits in the sense of, I'm the smartest, it's the most special, I need everybody else to work to defend me, because we're talking about, Mason, maybe you can speak more to this. We're talking about his criminal stuff, right? Like what was going on, that the Freemasons, what are the criminal battles that Joseph Smith is fighting at this time in Nauvoo? What are the accusations?
Well, the biggest part of it was surrounding polygamy, but you still had leftover debts from Kirtland, where the bank, the Safety Society or the anti-bank fell apart. There were still some lingering debts from that. I don't know how much, probably a decent amount, because of course they weren't very successful for very long in Missouri. Right. There was still a battle with Missouri because the state of Missouri had condemned him to death and he had escaped. So there's still that battle. And then there were all the rumors of polygamy, which had actually kind of started before that, but really came full strength in Nauvoo, which of course is when polygamy came full strength, at least in his day.
I thought with Joseph Smith, it was still pretty secretive unless you were in the higher circles in Nauvoo. And then it wasn't until Brigham Young when it became openly it
was not public knowledge until 1856, which was 12 years after Joseph Smith died. Yeah.
Okay, because I kind of feel like within Mormon circles in Nauvoo, most Mormons would have said it's not happening. It was the elite, kind of like the second anointing is today. Most Mormons, when we talk to, years ago, I talked to my mom about it before we stopped having contact. And then when we talked to your parents about it, they were like, no, there's no such thing as the second anointing, but the elites know about it. And the only reason the general public now knows about it is because those elites a couple of the elites talked about, I think 2 of them came out and said, no, this is a real thing. Yeah. And so I kind of feel like that's what it was with polygamy. But I think the thing that stands out to me is that you've got a man on the top doing really immoral things, and under the banner of the Freemason Lodge, they are raising money to support something horrific because of who Joseph Smith was. So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
And And that's, I mean, that gets really, and you see this pattern occurring over and over and over again in Mormon true crime circles, where you get this elite person, they get all kinds of special treatment, and then they're allowed to get away with really illegal things. We also see this in, I'm going to say, the normal Mormon society. Like, our church leaders are getting excused by most of their members for the SEC scandal. It's like, oh, well, it wasn't their fault, or they were just trying to escape taxes just like a normal human being. But when you read the SEC report, which is written in pretty plain English, the church admits to knowingly defrauding the IRS. They knew they were supposed to file those forms, and they chose not to in order to hide their wealth from their members. And you've got the victims supporting the perpetrator. And for me, I see this as a huge trauma bond. You know, this is a bond of, I'm going to, in an unhealthy way, stick up for people, especially leadership, doing really awful things because of their moral superiority. So when we look at Masonry, it was supposed to be, Mason, can you hear my microphone? Does it keep going in and out? Because I feel like it is, or is it just me?
A little bit, a little bit, but not enough to really notice.
Okay. So one of the things that, you know, I see here is that, or with Masonry, is that Masonry was, the intention of it was for men to gain a moral compass. And, you know, a lot of their symbols. So, you know, we talk about, and I'm going to pull up this picture right here. This right here is, oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. Let me fix this. Okay. Here we have the 5 points of fellowship. And in that Mormonism Live episode, you know, we talk about the 5 points of fellowship. Now, this was done away with in the 70s or the 90s. I don't remember. The temple ceremony has changed substantially, even from when I went through. So I went through the temple in 1999. When my parents went through the temple, they were still doing like the throat slitting. So I'll add this one. They were, you know, motioning and promising that they wouldn't reveal anything. And that if they did so, that they could be killed, that their throats would be slit or their bowels would be, you know, spilled. And so a lot of the signs that are still present in the temple ceremony today are remnants of these signs, but people going through that would never have seen this in their time. They don't understand what they are, what those remnants are, because they've been removed. But people who went through in a much earlier time period are going to know that this was here. Everything okay, Mason?
I was gonna go. I forgot to pull out the doorbell thing, and so I don't think it came through on the recording. But I was gonna go do that, and then I remember you locked me in. So
yeah, I locked you in. Haha. You can actually unlock yourself, and the doorbell thing is inside where you're locked in. I locked Mason in so the kids wouldn't bother
while
you.
You're talking, I'm gonna go do that. So
okay. So you know, my thoughts here, you know, like with the 5 points of fellowship, the theory is that it got removed from the Mormon temple ceremony because through a veil where you can't really see what you're doing, old men and young women kind of groping in and getting a little too close made a lot of females really uncomfortable. But one of the things that is it Cheryl Mason? Cheryl? I can't remember all of a sudden.
Cheryl.
Yeah, Cheryl from the book talked about that, you know, foot to foot meant that the men would always go to somebody in need's aid, and that there was a lot of symbolism with each of these 5 points of fellowship. And I don't remember all of them, and I definitely don't want to steal that thunder, but that I find it very interesting that foot to foot means we're going to go to aid those in need, but also that they were a moral society. And so we've got this, you know, organization that is supporting literally a criminal, that they're raising money and that they're claiming he's an innocent man simply because of the power he had over them. And for me, that is a huge red flag that there's a toxic, unhealthy relationship dynamic and a trauma bond. And I feel like a lot of members today are trauma bonded with the church in the sense that they cannot escape the church without some type of punishment to themselves. Even Mason, you and I have experienced, because we left the church, we are now labeled apostates. It gave your family permission to be verbally aggressive and horrific in ways that I don't think they normally would be, and whatnot. And then on the extreme end, you see a lot. I mean, ours is bad, but ours is kind of normal bad. And then on the extreme end, you see a lot more horrific abuse and trauma, and a need to try and please those in authority so that we do not lose our status within our own communities. And that's very concerning for me. So anyway.
Yeah, a lot of that's built into the temple as well, right? Once you've gone through the temple, in theory, you have everything that you need to cross the veil back into the presence of God. So you don't want to give any of that up. Right. So yeah, there's very much a trauma bond there, even though most people might not recognize it as being that. I mean, it's certainly what it is. And as you try and step away, you can certainly start to see it that way.
Right. And I think that's what's so fascinating to me is that as I listened to this episode, I was like, wow, I am hearing this information from a new lens and identifying the similarities. So, Mason, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the similarities that you were talking about at home before we came here, about, things like the apologists' remarks to similarities. So meaning like years ago, leadership denied that there was any Masonry in the Mormon temple. And now we're in a place where we're embracing it. What are some of the apologetic responses, Mason, that we kind of covered this morning?
So there's let's see here. I've got 2 paragraphs that I'm going to read. This comes from the churchofjesuschrist.org. So it's from their site, and I'll put the link in here for you for the show notes. But I want to read this first paragraph and then we can chat about it. And then there's a second paragraph that really kind of me, but anyway.
Wait, can you make that again face? That was such a cute face. Ooh, I like it. Yeah. I'm coming after you. Woo woo. Go ahead, hon.
All right. So this says Joseph and his associates understood Masonry as an institution that preserved vestiges of ancient truth. So basically they're saying, look, Masonry has a lot of ancient truth. We're going to be a part of that. We're going to glean it. And if you listen to Heber C. Kimball, we're going to steal it.
Right, we're going to celestialize it.
Yeah. We're going to take the errors out of it and roll
right. Who said it was celestial Masonry?
I never did find that quote. I
thought it was Orson
similar
Hyde.
Yeah, I never found that quote. So
okay, I thought it was Orson Hyde. And so I'm gonna interrupt you. I thought it was like Orson Hyde, and when I heard that, it was celestial. Heber C. Kimball. Okay, so it's Heber C. Kimball, and he says, we have celestial Masonry, and then my thought is, ooh, let's think celestial Masonry. Anyway, sorry, that's just my joke. Go ahead, Mason.
So this is from the LDS site. Emphasis on the similarities between the teaching styles and outward forms of Masonry and the temple endowment obscures significant differences in their substance. Masonic ceremonies promote self-improvement, brotherhood, charity, and fidelity to truth for the purpose of making better men, who in turn make a better society. I'm just going to put a pause in there. This is me talking now. That's what Mormonism does too. All right, now moving on, quoting again. During temple ordinances, men and women covenant with God to obey his laws for the purpose of gaining exaltation through the atonement of Jesus Christ. For me, that sounds like different words, same sort of thing. Continuing on, Masonic rituals deliver stage-by-stage instruction using dramatization and symbolic gestures and clothing with content based on Masonic legends. The endowment employs similar teaching devices, but it draws primarily upon the revelation and inspired translation given to Joseph Smith for its content. Now, I think, so that's the end of that paragraph. I think that if you have been through the temple and are not subject to the church anymore, I think that we all can call BS on that. Let me just say this again. The endowment employs similar teaching devices, but it draws primarily upon the revelations and inspired translations given to Joseph Smith for its content. It's just, when you look at all the similarities, that's hogwash. That's just them trying to say Joseph Smith made it better.
Right. Well, and I think
at least it feels that way.
Yeah. And I think, with this, there's this denial. And as you keep reading Mason, that's going to really show up in the sense of when an organization or a person is telling you, hey, you really don't need to worry about this because blah, blah, blah. But then you step away from the emotion of that and you're like, wait, no, you're basically saying it's the same damn thing. Where, yes, you're teaching in symbolism, but the handshakes and the tokens and a lot of the passwords, the new name and your given name and the name of the deity and the description of deity and the reenactments and all of that, it's the same, except, I don't know what Masonry's overarching goal was. Like, theirs was to be better people and ours is to get into heaven. But the words are the same. The practices are the same. The other thought that I have is,
similar enough. Maybe not the same, but at least similar enough that it can't be discredited.
Right. Like it's a shadow of it, but it's a really well-defined shadow. Right. And again, you would have to read the book Method Infinite to just really, especially if you've been through a Mormon temple and you remember all of the pieces of it. Method Infinite is going to be like, oh, wow. Like, I know that on the episode Mormonism Live, they talked about, the name for God having being more of a description, but in Masonry, like one of the descriptive pieces is marrow in the bones. And in Mormonism, it's marrow in the bones. Like the name for God, the password to stand in God's presence isn't a name, it's a description, but it's supposed to be the true name of God. And I mean, and goodness Mason gracious, if that was his name, I wouldn't want to repeat it. Like, every time you're in trouble, strengthen the, what is it? Marrow in the bones, strengthen the sinews. Yeah, I don't think I want to repeat the paragraph every time I'm addressing my deity. But the other thing is recognizing that if Joseph Smith was alive today and went through the Mormon temple, it wouldn't look the same. It wouldn't be the same. Like, my kids and I had the opportunity. Mason, I don't think you were with us on this vacation because I went with your mom while you were in anesthesia school. And one of the things that I noticed is we went into the Kirtland, Ohio temple that is now owned by, was it Kirtland, Ohio or Nauvoo?
Yes,
which one burned down? Kirtland, thank you, because the Nauvoo one burned down, right? Okay.
It's been rebuilt, yes.
Yeah. So the Kirtland, Ohio temple, the one that, Joseph Smith is supposed to have revealed all this stuff in, does not look anything like a temple today. It actually, to me, looks like almost like the choir seats in the back, like a general conference center like seats at a much smaller scale. And then it's like regular pews like a chapel. And then they would separate it with curtains. It was open to the public. I don't you didn't have to get a recommend. It wasn't as exclusive as it is now. And then there were the upper rooms. Right. And then there were the upper rooms that were more like office buildings or a classroom. Like it does not look anything like the temple today. And so when we talk about it wasn't supposed to change, Joseph Smith revealed the full truth. Well, what the hell happened? Why did we change?
Well, there was no endowment ceremony in the Kirtland Temple, so that all changed. So whatever the Kirtland Temple was supposed to be for it, initially, if you look at the doctrine of the church, it really just became a place where Jesus Christ could come and accept his people, and Joseph Smith got more power and authority from other angels and translated beings. So as far as like the ceremony that
angels danced on the roof.
Right.
But I don't think
it was all a representation that God had accepted the building, that God had accepted their sacrifice. But as far as doctrine revealed the way that we suppose from the temple today, there was none of that.
It almost makes me wonder, and I know somebody has the answer, but I don't. When did the endowment, more like it is today, actually take over? Because
it's
or
been,
did they maybe
it's been
use it as a
little changes
multi-purpose?
here and there. So
Right.
the biggest changes happened in 1990 when they took out the penalties. And then there were more changes made again in 2019 when Russell M. Nelson took over and kind of changed a lot of it. And then more changes again in 2023. And I do have some links that I'll have in the show notes that you can go to. One of them is an article that talks about changes in it. And then there's also, if you go to RFM, he did an episode that talked about the changes, and there's a few TikToks and things like that. So you can see some of those changes.
So we'll provide
RFM
those
really
links.
does a good job of it, of just going through the specific changes that have been made.
All right. So let me add some of these. So this right here is one of the changes. So this is the change that they made in 1981 or 1978 or something like that.
This would be from 1990, the change that was
1990.
made.
Okay. So 27 years ago, this says today, this is older.
So this would have been done in 2007.
Okay.
No,
so
2017, I guess. 2017.
Okay. They permanently removed the death penalty. This is where they are, I will never reveal the signs or tokens of whichever blah, blah, blah priesthood. And we'll be going into that a little bit later here in our temple series.
The other one that looks like this has the exact quote from the ceremony.
So, but I really like how this one accentuates the rather than do so, I would suffer my life to be taken.
Yeah.
And this Masonic. Is where, very Masonic and also very extremism. Not something I would say from a loving God, especially if the way to get back into heaven is that you're going to have all these passwords and signs and tokens so you can enter the presence of God. You would think that God would want them to be more well known, but they're not. Well, they're very exclusive and secretive.
This is part of, you asked the question a little bit ago, what kind of organization did Joseph Smith set up that allowed for things like the Laffertys to happen? This is part of it right here. If you're going to put in here all these special and sacred things and put in a penalty that says your throat can be cut if you reveal these things, it is easy to extrapolate from there. Like with the Lafferty brothers, there was no revealing of these secrets. She literally stopped living the way that they thought she should live. That was it. And of course, there's more details to it.
Right. She was still active mainstream Mormon.
Yes.
Like she wasn't leaving the Mormon faith. She just wasn't buying into the extremism of the Lafferty brothers. And the Lafferty brothers were kind of doing this mix between, the fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the FLDS polygamous group in Colorado City. Is that in Arizona or Utah? I think it's in Arizona.
It is.
Okay, so Colorado City, Arizona, right on the border of Arizona and Utah. She was just saying, hey, your extremism isn't super appropriate. But how did they kill her? They strangled her, I think, and slit her throat.
I think so. And we're not here to talk about that, of course, but the idea, if you ask the question, what did Joseph Smith set up that allows for that kind of extremism? This is it. He took that. What did the Masonic Lodge set up that allowed them, that group of Masons, to kill that other person? This is it. You set up a secret squirrel. You set up a secret squirrel organization and say, if you tell anybody, we're going to kill you, or we can kill you, you set up for extremism. And of course, somewhere along the line that had to change. And it did, but that's what was set up that allows for that kind of stuff.
Whoops, I hit the wrong button here. Let me pull us back. And I got to remove this one real quick. I think, too, that it's important to recognize that is how abusers silence their victims.
Absolutely.
All the time. When we look at sexual assault or child abuse, it's very much don't tell your teacher, don't tell your mom, don't tell your dad, don't tell anybody. And if you tell, they won't like you anymore. They won't love you anymore. They'll think that you're lying. I'll hurt you. I'll kill your brother. I'll kill your sister. You know, these types of things in the movie, The True Mormon Crime, about being kidnapped twice. What is it? Kidnapped in Plain Sight or something. Abducted in Plain Sight. That's what it's called. Where the young woman was kidnapped twice. One of the reasons why that young girl didn't tell anybody was because she was protecting her sister from having to go through what she was going through.
That's traumatized in the movie The Green Mile too. If you've seen that, the guy comes in and takes both girls and tells each one of them privately, if you don't go along with this, I'm going to kill your sister. And so they both do, and he ends up killing both of them. But yeah, that's what you tell people, right? If you don't go along, I'm going to hurt something that matters to you.
Right. And I would say that
person or whatever.
Right. I would say that almost always secrets are dangerous, surprises are fun. And so, you know, the only different, and this actually comes from in my book, Finn is the one that taught me that phrase. And that is, you know, surprises are temporary secrets for gift giving and fun connective exchanges versus secrets. And even in the Brene Brown curriculum, you know, we talk about, you know, you don't necessarily need to share your secrets with the world. But having a small trusted circle of people that help you hold the burden of those secrets is very healthy. Because secrets are dangerous. So I want to add this again to the stage, Mason, and I'm going to read it. So this says, we and each of us covenant and promise that we will not reveal any of the secrets of this, the first token of the Aaronic priesthood, with its accompanying name and sign or penalty. Should we do so, we agree that our throats be cut from ear to ear and our tongue be torn out by our roots. And I think it's important to remember that that first token of the Aaronic priesthood is the new name that is given in the temple.
Well, and it's really the beginning of the secrecy.
Right. It's the beginning of the secrecy.
None of the covenants that you make for the doctrines of the church are really all that secret. You know, we could talk about those kind of things, but all the tokens and signs, that's where the secrecy begins and where the penalties really began.
Right. Yeah. Because in the temple, you know, one of the things that we promise is I'm not going to cheat on my husband. I'm not going to have any sexual relationships outside of the bonds of
marriage. Yeah.
Sometimes marriage is a bomb. The bonds of marriage, and that I'm not legally and lawfully wedded to. Okay, that's not a secret. But if you reveal the sign and token, or the name of the token and sign, name of the sign, token, whatever that goes with it, then you're in trouble. But on that, the name and the token, it's a different name for Jesus. That's all it is. It's not, I don't know, spectacular. It's just and we'll go through some of those later. So, all right, Mason, I'm gonna Mason, I'm gonna turn this back over to you so you can read that second paragraph.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to read the first line of that first paragraph again. Emphasis on the similarities between the teaching styles and outward forms of Masonry and the temple endowment obscures significant differences in their substance. What I hear them saying is, you're focusing on the wrong thing and we don't like it. So then the next paragraph here, another significant difference between Masonic rituals and the endowment was access. This just makes me laugh, by the way. While Masons had strict guidelines about who could join the fraternity, Joseph Smith hoped to give the endowment even to the weakest of the saints just as soon as they are prepared to receive and a proper place is prepared to communicate it. Like, oh my gosh, I got to come back to that. And talk about this, but I'm going to finish the quote. Accordingly, Brigham Young and other men and women whom Joseph endowed before his death administered the ordinance to thousands of Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo. Moreover, most Masonic groups excluded women. Joseph, on the other hand, taught that it was essential that Latter-day Saint women receive the endowment. Many women in Nauvoo were prepared for this ordinance through their involvement in the Relief Society. So not untrue, right? Joseph Smith did want both men and women to get it. Cool. But he did teach that was necessary for salvation. So
right, Mason, but in the temple, the woman promises, or at least when I went through, I think they've changed this now, but when I went through, I promised and covenanted complete obedience to the men, to my priesthood holders.
Why wouldn't you want women to have that?
Right.
Right? If you want subjugation, let's make it a covenant.
Right. And so in the temple, yes, women are allowed to go there. But when I went, I had to veil my face. I couldn't look at God, and he couldn't look at me without a veil over my face, which is just dehumanizing. I remember hating that. It was like, why can't God look at me without a veil? And why can't I look in his eyes without a veil? But the men didn't have to. And I covenanted and promised that I would obey my husband as he obeyed the Lord. But then the idea is, if my husband isn't obeying the Lord, I still obey the priesthood leadership. And if my husband leads me astray, he's going to be held accountable and I'm off the hook.
You're still a subject in this kingdom. You're still a subject.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
So let me go back to this again. Another significant difference between Masonic rituals and the endowment was access. While Masons had strict guidelines about who could join the fraternity, just flip that around. While Mormons have strict guidelines about who could join the temple, Joseph Smith hoped to give the endowment. Well, let me just focus on a couple of words here. Joseph Smith hoped. So he's saying that he wanted to give the endowment, even to the weakest of the saints, just as, quote, soon as they are prepared to receive. Like, those are exclusions. That is the definition of an exclusion. I really want you to have this, but I really want you to have this, but those are the same things. So they're coloring this statement as if anybody can have this. Anybody can have the endowment. We're not trying to hold it out, but you have to do these things. Masonic, aside from the fact that they didn't allow women, it was the same thing. Any man that wanted to join a Masonic lodge had the ability to. Any man who wanted to join had the ability to. The only exclusion was women at the time. That's the same thing that they're talking about here. But I just wanted to point it out because the church likes to color the statements. They want to make it sound like everything is inclusive, but in the very words they're using, it is very exclusive. Like, listen to the real message. Don't listen to their colorful words. Listen to the real message. And the real message is, if you want to have the endowment, you have to do these things.
Right. And I think, something that's really right. I think this is one of those things of, you hear the words, you have an emotional response, you think you get it, but then you've got to back away from that emotional response and look at the data. What are some of the things that would exclude somebody from the temple? Not paying tithing. So Joseph Smith says he wants the weakest people there, which I'm going to assume as, I'm weak in spirit, I'm weak in testimony, maybe I'm not financially secure, I'm more of a vulnerable population, but the only way you get in is if you pay for it, which is why so many people will tell you Mormonism has a monopoly on salvation, because you have to pay 10% of your tithing or lie about it to get into the temple. Other things are you can't drink coffee, you can't drink tea, you have to be obeying the word of wisdom.
I make a
You
comment on
can't.
that too.
Okay, yeah, you can't speak evil or criticize any of the leaders. So in order to get into the temple, you have to be a sheeple. You have to just follow blindly and not think critically. But yeah, Mason, I love the point that you bring up, is that if you just switch the words around a little bit, they say that it's not as exclusive, but I would say that the Mormon temple ceremony is even more exclusive than Freemasonry. Like, how many people in the world have been through a Mormon temple? It's you have to be in the club in order to go there. And Mason, when you and I went to Italy a year ago, we were able to go into almost all of the buildings. Like, there was one part of the Sistine Chapel that I don't think they let tourists into, but we were able to go in, we were able to view, we were able to go into these churches. Like, it was open to the public. And Mormons will say, oh, well, it's open to the public too for a time period before we dedicate it. But when you walk through the Mormon temple, you do not see anything that is actually going on in the Mormon temple. It is secret, secret, sacred. What's the difference? There really isn't. But when we were able to go into these other churches in Italy and in Europe and in Greece and whatnot, we were able to see the structure. You're able to observe their ceremonies. You're able to be there. And so, yes, very exclusive. Mason, what were you going to say?
I have two things to add to that I want. First, let me just clarify. The Mormon Church has the right to be exclusive, right? They can let anyone that they want or hold anyone that they want in or out of the temple. That is completely their right. I don't have any issues with that. I have an issue with them coloring it as if it's something different. So I just want to say that first. I'm not arguing with their right to do it. I'm arguing with the fact that they're not stating it, which I've always had an issue with. If you're not accepting what reality is, then you're obfuscating your part in it. The second part is that, as far as I know, and someone can correct me if this is the case, the first set of questions that were asked for worthiness to go into the temple was in 1856 or 57, somewhere around there. I'd have to look at my notes again. That's not all that important. But it was after Joseph Smith. As far as I know, Joseph Smith, you could go to the temple if you were loyal to the church. That was pretty much it. But I think that if you also look at this, if you allow initially everyone who wants to go to the temple, you've created this idea that this is beautiful. This is going to provide strength. This is going to be good for you. And then you can become more exclusive along the way while still holding on to the idea that anyone can go. It just gives the organization more power, because they can say stuff like anyone can go, anyone can be there, while holding on to very exclusive ideals about who can be there. And so there's a lot of power that is gleaned from that. And it's just, say it like it is, really is my concern there. Say it like it is. If you're going to compare Mormonism to Masonry, call it what it is. Don't obfuscate. Don't say, yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but that doesn't really talk about how there's a lot of differences too. Okay, fine. But don't minimize the similarities. Say, yeah, there's a lot of similarities. And you know what? As you go through it, you're going to see some stuff that is really very similar. However, we would like to call attention to the fact that some significant things are different, and even help you see why we consider those things more important than the similarities. Okay, fine. That's calling it like it is. Mm-hmm. But they don't want to do that. They want to deny it. Then they want to minimize it. And then they want to turn your attention away from it until you forget about it. And that's just not being true or honest to the reality of the situation.
Right. So, Mason, I guess my question for you is, can you give us 2 or 3 other examples in Mormonism where you see this practiced in your day-to-day interactions? Do you have any ideas?
You mean like other doctrines that they've done this about? Is that what you're trying to talk about? Or
No, like just in your normal practice. So, where it's like where you're getting this double speak, because what you're talking about is this double speak. It's,
okay.
yeah, there's some similarities here, but these are the differences. And then when you look at what they're claiming is different, there's really not any difference, where it's like this distraction technique in order to, minimize doubts, minimize questions.
So
Do you see that anywhere else?
I think that the first thing that comes to my mind is it was just a few years ago that Russell Nelson stated, that those that leave the church are lazy learners.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a couple conferences later, he said something along the lines, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but something along the lines of, we need to reach out in love. We need to be loving of all these people, of everyone, whether they believe or don't believe. We need to reach out to love to them. Well, then, of course, just this last conference, so just a couple conferences later, he comes out with a statement that says, never take advice from someone that doesn't believe. And there's a lot of argument about whether or not that was, don't take advice about religious things or spiritual things, or don't take advice about anything. You can go wherever you want on that. But what he said was, don't take advice from people that don't believe. And so he's this like wishy-washy. It's like he's trying to follow this political current. Like, oh no, I want to, I'm going to shame the people that are leaving the church. You guys are lazy learners. I'm going to shame you. And then there's this huge backlash about it. So he comes out with this softer thing of this love thing. Well, we need to love everybody and invite them into our lives and blah, 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 blah. Right. And then the real piece is, well, now we're not being hard enough. All these members are listening to these non-members and they're getting the wrong idea, quote unquote. Don't take advice from anybody who's left the church or isn't a believer. There's this huge thing of back and forth and back and forth. It's how do you treat members that leave the church? Do you ostracize them? Because there's lots of comments that make it sound like that's the right thing to do. Do you reach out in love to them? There's lots of comments that make it sound like that's what you're supposed to do. Do you listen to them? Lots of comments that make it sound like that's what you're supposed to do. Do you not listen to them? Lots of comments that make it sound like that's what it's supposed to do. So the messages are clear when they're stated, but the overall message is very unclear about what they think is best.
Right. And I think that what that does is it gives us, what Bill Reel and RFM are always talking about, plausible deniability, in the sense of when we say, hey, Russell M. Nelson is trying to tear apart families, then we can pull up the quote from the conference where he was like, be loving, be accepting, be kind. And so it's an obfuscation. I cannot say that word. Yeah. Thank you, Mason. You're so much smarter than me. Hayden says he has some questions. So I was just going to, Mason, is there anything else you wanted to add before we close out today?
I don't think so. I think we're going to get to a lot of some of these. We're kind of gleaning over some details today, and we'll get deeper into them at the next episode.
Yeah, this is the beginning of our temple series. So, Mason, if you wouldn't mind stepping out and calling our son, because he says he's got some questions about the kids, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. And if you pop back in, I'll share your screen again.
All right.
Alrighty. So I think that one of the things that we really wanted to do today, kind of our intention, which we didn't state in the beginning, was to set the pattern of take what's being said and check it with the data. We need to do this in all of our relationships. If somebody is saying, I'm really sorry that I did this, but then they're not making any effort to change it, and then they keep doing it and they keep apologizing, what does that tell you about that person? And maybe what it tells you is they don't have the ability to change it. I see that Mason and I have talked quite a bit about our son that has schizophrenia. And one of the things that you see with schizophrenia is a very flat affect and a tendency to argue right up front, because there's so much anxiety that we call these the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So these aren't the hallucinations and the things that are clearly psychotic processes. So they're called the like negative symptoms or the silent symptoms of schizophrenia. So the other day when I went in to help Brig do his meal planning and do some meal prep, I'm helping him cook, and he's arguing with me every step of the way. He's telling me, this is stupid. Why do we have to do this? You're taking too long. You're in my space. I hate this. And then when we finish, it takes us, he can only tolerate about 45 minutes of food prep before he is done. But as soon as we're done and I'm leaving, he will tell me, I'm so sorry, Mom. I know that I make that so hard for you. I'm really grateful. I can recognize in Brig that there is a limitation because of an organic disability that he has. Whereas with my father, when he was constantly gaslighting me and not taking any accountability, and I'm seeing this pattern and I'm going, he has the ability to identify and take accountability for his part. He's not putting effort in. I'm going to check that with other people around me. Hey, what do you think about this? I'm collecting data and recognizing I need to navigate the relationship with my father differently than I do with my relationship with Brig. So really let's look at the patterns here. Let's take a look at what did Joseph Smith do or say? What are these patterns? Does he have a pattern of being dishonest? Does he have a pattern of taking the worker ideas of other people and shifting them in a way that benefits him, so that he is the expert and he's always maintaining a position of power over other people? How is he utilizing that position of power? How is he Mason just sent me a message that says, "You are so sexy." Thanks, babe. I don't know if you're back or not. Let me see if you're back. Thanks,
I'm
babe. So let's kind of check this. What else has Joseph Smith hijacked and made his own, and then claimed that he is the only person with the authority to add or take away from it, and that you are obligated to believe or act on or behave in certain ways in order to participate in this? What are these patterns telling you? As you dig in, I'm going to show this book again really quickly. Let me do this and see if I can. Hey, there it is. So, what are some of the other similarities? I know that as I've listened to episode 96 of Mormonism Live, and I've looked, a little bit at this book, like the little bits that I can see, the pieces begin to fall into place, that the behaviors are taking away your individual authenticity, which is absolutely done in the temple. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. That it is taking over your ability to choose a different way with the threat of losing your community, and that they are taking power over your financial and other resources. That suddenly we are back in that area of, this is cultish, this is unhealthy, this is a power grab, I'm the victim, am I trauma bonded because I cannot separate my identity and myself and my choices from this organization or from this individual without a threat of significant loss? We're in an unhealthy place. And so as we continue in our temple series moving forward, we really want to identify, where are we losing our individualism, our critical thinking ability, our voice, and our ability to think and choose differently than the organization or the individual or individuals that we are engaging in? And what does that mean for my overall wellness? And that's really what we're hoping to gain as we start our temple series, is where are the lines of this is healthy and highly spiritual and uplifting, and this is constricting and tightening and I'm actually losing my identity because of my participation in it. That's kind of what we're looking at as we move through our temple series. So, Mason, did you have anything else that you wanted to say before we close up?
Nope, I don't think so. Thanks for letting us be here, guys.
All righty. So I just want to put in a plug-in. If you would like to reach out to us, you can do so. Let me double check this. Make sure I spelled it right. seagirlcommunications.com is our website. There it is right there. We would love to hear from you. You can hit the contact us button and that will give you the information to our email. We absolutely love to hear from our listeners. We are going to be working on some donation offers and whatnot coming up as we're looking at either some nonprofit stuff or something else. And so we'll be giving you those links. And then, of course, if you would like to donate to the show, those links will show up here in our end credits. Thank you so much for being here today. Absolutely. When you're done with this, go take a listen to episode 96 of Mormonism Live about Masonry and the temple. And we've had a blast being here with you today. So thank you. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Adios. Me, but anyway.
Wait, can you make that again face? That was such a cute face. Ooh, I like it.
Yeah,
I'm coming after you. Woo woo.